Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. Netflix have released the Mr. McMahon documentary, a limited series, 6 episodes in total. So we're going to do a 6-part series on this channel, going through episode by episode of Mr. McMahon and giving our reaction to what is brought in the series. There will be some distressing topics that will be discussed throughout, so do be aware of that when you are watching this. And of course, what we will be discussing, of course, is allegations that are made in the Netflix series. Nothing is being accused by us. We are just merely reacting to what is suggested on the Netflix documentary. I'm joined by the one and only Mr. NXSteve, and House, this was your suggestion to do a review series of this, and obviously this is going to be episode 1, which is called Junior. Yeah, what's your reactions to this first episode?
I mean, just to talk briefly, dude, I mean, I at the time of recording this, I've only watched the first 4 episodes because I've just been powering through it this morning, and like the first kind of like 1 or 2, I feel like we're probably going to breeze through most of it. It's all pretty self-explanatory. 3 and 4, I think, is where it's really going to get juicy, and then from what I can tell, 5 and 6 are going to be outright crazy. But dude, man, it's going to be interesting. Like, there's like, from what I've seen so far, there is like almost although it's hard to believe, a very human side to Vince McMahon, and I think that's what a lot of us don't really believe or see. I mean, even in the first like opening segments of this episode, the first couple of lines that he talks about, it's kind of like it's very hard to believe that that's how he portrays himself. Do you know what I mean? But dude, otherwise, I'm super gassed to talk about this. Let's just get going, man.
Let's do it. Well, like you say, they do make a very big preparations. In fact, just before we do get started and dive into it, we should make reference that Vince McMahon himself did release a statement before this went live. So we will read that statement for everyone. I don't regret participating in this Netflix documentary. The producers had an opportunity to tell an objective story about my life and incredible business that I built, which were equally filled with excitement, drama, fun, and a fair amount of controversy and life lessons. Unfortunately, based on an early partial cut I've seen, this doc falls short and takes a predictable path of conflating the Mr. McMahon character with my true self of Vince. The title and promos alone make that evident. A lot of misrepresented or left out entirely in effort to leave viewers intentionally confused. The producers are typically editing tricks with out of context footage and dated soundbites, etc., to distort the viewer's perception and support a deceptive narrative. In an attempt to further their misleading accounts, the producers use a lawsuit based on an affair I ended as evidence that I am in fact Mr. McMahon. I hope the viewer can keep an open mind and remember that there are 2 sides to every story. There certainly are 2 sides to every story. Obviously, there are reactions to stuff that's been said there as well. Obviously, we will be talking perhaps later in the series about some of the stuff that's has been done, because obviously it was said very at the start of the documentary that this actually had to be halted before the end of this. It was near the end of the process when all the allegations came out about Mr. McMahon in 2022, which of course would leave him to leave the company, return to the company, and then sell his shares and leave again. So that is actually a part of it. So over 100 hours of footage was recorded of him and with WWE superstars, either current or previous, many legends involved on it as well. Yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of the stuff that we are going to see here is pre those new allegations that of course were released by the Wall Street Journal in 2022.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've got listed at the minute, I've got 29 interviewees. So because I was baffled as to how they got the 100 hours to start off with. But like I said, from the first 4 episodes I've watched, I've got 29 names listed. I'm not going to list them all off because most of them, you know where they are anyway. We'll kind of bring them up as we talk about subjects. But from what I've seen in the first 4 episodes, I don't personally think there's anything too controversial. I think the most important thing to remember about when reviewing this series is that it's all claims. Like, this person is claiming this person is claiming that, which I think is a very important thing to remember. So it's not necessarily that these are facts. These are what each individual who was interviewed said as their opinions. And I think the other thing that you have to take into consideration as well is at time of recording, some of these people that I interviewed are still hired by the company.
Yes.
So some of this stuff cannot be taken. It can be taken with a pinch of salt because there is still outside factors that play into what they probably put into this interview. But then there are people that have nothing to do with WWE. They're interviewed that have some pretty damning opinions and thoughts that maybe you should take with a bit more than a pinch of salt. But it's going to be interesting to debate it anyway.
Absolutely. Like we say, we'll be giving just reactions to those as well. We're not throwing facts or anything like that. We're just reacting to what's going along. So the first thing then to go into, which really took me by surprise, Vince McMahon Jr. Did not meet Vince McMahon Sr. until he was 12 years old. Apparently, it was, I think, living in a trailer park area. He was very poor growing up, obviously, with his mum and an abusive stepfather. Obviously, you know, that was a big shock to learn at the very beginning of this documentary.
Yeah, dude. I mean, even from like the initial opinion, like initial thought of it, you sit there and think, okay, that kind of may explain some of his life decisions because of what he experienced as a child. Because obviously, you know, things that happen to children like can affect him long term in going into the future. But dude, I was genuinely the same as you. Like, to not realize that he'd come from a poor background, that his father was this wealthy businessman that he didn't even know till he was 12 years old. I think it's just a general shock in itself.
Yeah, I feel so as well. And I mean, obviously, not to you know, with the claims that have been thrown out to rationalize that thinking or behavior, but obviously to have experienced that sort of stuff himself. And he did say when meeting his father that it was almost like, oh, this isn't how the dad behaves. Like, it was almost like, you know, it was just, oh, you treated normally almost a little bit, but it wasn't really the sense of like compassion. It was more thing that they would always discuss business. He would see his father in action, seeing the idea of professional wrestling, seeing good guy versus bad guy, story being told, and he said, I like a bit of this. I'm into this already. I see what my father's business is, and he wanted to get involved in that. And obviously, he said that the main connection he felt with him and his father was talking about that business and actually sharing blood. Those were the two things they sort of had in common. But Vince would eventually get his opportunity, of course, and it would be in a sort of, I believe the place was Bangor, Maine, was the starting point for him, and he eventually got his break as an announcer. Obviously, there was a talk about someone that said they were going to walk out, and Vince McMahon Sr. would have like some coins and that to keep people quiet, to keep them stick around. But on this occasion, didn't pay to keep the person. Instead, said, Vince, you're in. And sort of Vince had to kind of wing being an announcer.
Yeah, it's very well. It's kind of not shocking to see that things in the business didn't change much between sort of like the early 80s, late 90s, and you see how the fact that everyone was really money driven when it comes to this industry. And yeah, like the fact that the commentator is obviously trying to stiff Vince Sr. for some more money to do the show. Vince just goes, do you know what, sod it, throws Vince Jr. into the equation. And you can tell from the clips that they show that obviously, dude, it'd be the same as me or you really trying to do commentary on a wrestling match. It's very rough to start with, but you know, he does get better within time and obviously used to it. But yeah, it's nice to see that nothing changes in wrestling in 20 years.
Absolutely, indeed. It would be a while, I guess, till we hear what a maneuver. But yeah, I mean, we carry on. And obviously, Linda McMahon is brought into the picture as well. She's actually featured in this documentary as well. Apparently, when they met, Linda was 13, Vince was 16. Of course, they would go on to be married. Obviously, would have their kids, Shane and Stephanie as well. And it would be a situation where Vince McMahon Sr. would want to give up the territory game. Of course, the territories, and just to explain, obviously, for back in the day, because everyone knows WWE is this global juggernaut that takes over the whole country, and you know, tours and goes different places from New York to Florida to Connecticut to, I don't know, somewhere in the Georgia's areas to Texas, all the way back to I don't know, Alabama or wherever. But it's just, that's what WWE does. Then it does all these international shows now. We've seen this year, example, France, Germany, Saudi Arabia, UK, all these different places that they go to on a regular basis. Where back then it was all about territories. So WWE had the Northeast, had like the New York sort of territory where you had all these different other promotions that were pretty much everywhere else. And a Florida based one with Florida Championship Wrestling, you had AWA that was in sort of mid-Atlantic sort of area as well, and all these different like bits, and you didn't cross the line, you didn't want to, you know, upset everyone else. It was kind of like an unwritten rule. But Vince Jr. would go on to buy the company from his father Vince Sr. Of course, there was discussion originally that apparently Gorilla Monsoon was going to actually take the company from Vince Sr., which actually is a big surprise. And Vince Sr. wasn't looking to Vince Jr. to taking over, which leads some question marks into this documentary about the relationship between father and son. But Vince Jr. does do it, but he has to do some payments to get the company. And many of the belief that he will not make those fulfilled payments. In fact, if Vince does say, I think it was 4 payments in total, and he was using it with the house gate that was coming in to make those payments. If he couldn't fulfill them, say he'd done 2 of them and he couldn't do the other 2, then Vince will get to keep the money and also keep the promotion to go and sell on again, which was good for in his eyes and also good for the shareholders. But to the surprise of everybody, Vince Jr. did it. He actually managed to get everything in and managed to get control of the promotion. What was your take with all of this? Because obviously, like we said there, we talked about this relationship with Vince Sr., Vince Jr. Is it a shock to you to learn? Because for me, it's new knowledge to learn that this wasn't necessarily going to be remaining a McMahon family legacy. It was the fact that Vince had to actually buy it. It was going to be in Gorilla Monsoon's hands.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're going to learn of these 6 episodes is that when it comes to business, Vince McMahon is a very smart guy. Like there's 2 occasions that bite him on the backside. There's one actually that they're talking about in this first one, which is obviously about him breaking into the territories and how it was essentially a gentleman's agreement that you didn't cross state lines, you didn't go into someone else's show, you didn't bother, taking business away from someone, taking food away from someone else's dinner plate. But like I said, over the episodes I've seen so far, his knack for business is incredible. Like how he managed to do what he did, and like you said, like I was sitting there thinking about when he was talking about actually making these payments, and I'm like, the guys that he must have had wrestling, he genuinely must have been paying peanuts because he's obviously got to make some sort of, like, I can't imagine it's a kind of, do the next 4 shows and we'll take the money from it. It's kind of like he's probably got to do more than that or earn more than that to actually buy this. And yeah, like the fact that, I mean, they say at the documentary that they believe that Vince Sr. was never really interested in selling to Junior. I mean, yeah, I can see why, but the fact that Vince is willing to go out there and make a name for himself and, do you know what I mean, try and make his own name in the world of professional wrestling. Do you know what I mean? I give him credit for it, the fact that he actually went out and did it, because there's many guys you would see, especially nowadays, that would fail and he wouldn't end up being the promoter that he ended up being. So I give him props for that. But yeah, it's just generally, like I said, it's very eye-opening to see some of the stuff that he just went through at his younger age. Like, even like you said, in the fact that Gorilla Monsoon was meant to buy the business. I mean, like, that in itself is kind of like, he's a wrestler at this point. So, I mean, we've seen how a lot of the territories went when they were run by wrestlers, especially when you look at, for instance, Stampede Wrestling that was owned by Stu Hart. Like, a lot of all these companies were owned by wrestlers, and like, for any modern day fan now, really, you kind of see how WWE just like took a load of companies like Evolve and stuff, and it's like, regardless of the timeline, whether it's the 1980s or the 2010s, 2020s, he's still doing the same thing, and he's still trying to dominate the world of professional wrestling.
Absolutely. It's all about, building the brand. Like I said, he does say openly in this, I don't play fair. I don't play fair. It's business, and I'm here to win. And he had a different vision to what wrestling was. Obviously, wrestling was pro wrestling, was the territories, was all about wrestling first. And he was all about strictly entertainment, the idea of bringing in the talk shows and, stuff like that to, expand on the characters and everything like that. It wasn't just this one hit show where it was just strictly about wrestling. It was all about the storytelling and obviously that feeling, that emotion, which also was stressed at the very start of the episode as well. But you said breaking into the territories, obviously had more money to play with than some of those territories, because he was taking a lot of the top talent from those territories, which was a big taboo at the time, bringing them over to his company, and then actually deciding to tour into those territories with those wrestlers that were the top people were going back to those territories under WWE or WWF at the time. Obviously, they're making the stress where you hear WWF, but you see WWE on the subtitles on the screen. Obviously, for example, people like Bret Hart coming from Stampede Wrestling, like you mentioned, Greg Valentine coming over, and all these big names were, there was all these big names that were just coming on over to WWF at the time. And obviously his dad wasn't really in favor of what was going on, but eventually you could see it was paying off because Vince was taking over the global market, or certainly was taking over that American market. Yeah, I mean,
this is one of the things as well that comes back to bite Vince in the backside later on, is that the fact that he could do this because none of these guys had contracts with their territories. It was kind of a case of, you're wrestling for this guy for $50 a night. Come wrestle for me, I'll pay you $100 a night. And Vince wasn't afraid to go out there and go into territories and put shows on. I think like one of the first ones he kind of does outside of his territory is like St. Louis, but he starts going on national TV and he starts fronting it and he starts trying to make it as a proper global television. And like he's at this point obviously trying to break into network TV, and like you said, he's got all these cogs in motion. And like there's a point later on where he talks about WrestleMania and the fact that he went on holiday to have a break and comes up with the idea of WrestleMania while he's on holiday. The guy just never switches off.
Yeah, literally, Linda says, like, you didn't enjoy any of this. You didn't relax at all, did you? You just came here and worked. I think it's the state of the businessman. And obviously, to come up with the creation of WrestleMania, like we said there, we can talk about that now a little bit, is the fact that, he said, NFL has the Super Bowl. We have all these, the World Series, all these things. Why shouldn't wrestling have its end of season show? And that's what WrestleMania was designed for. Obviously, though, but before that, he needed a centerpiece. He needed someone to build the company around, because he said Bob Backlund was the one that his father had chosen. However, I think he went on to pretty much say that Bob was a bit bland. I'm now paraphrasing here a little bit, but at the same time, he wanted someone with more charisma. That's something he was looking for. And originally, he had looked for Dusty Rhodes, which was interesting. That was the one that was popped up in there, which I was again unaware of. But Dusty didn't buy into this, so someone else that he went for instead was Hulk Hogan, someone that originally had worked for Vince Sr., but of course went to go off and do Rocky 3, and that led to him actually being fired and said he wouldn't be welcome back to the promotion. It did take Hogan's career off by storm by appearing in Rocky 3. I believe Hogan had gone to AWA, was then taken back by Vince because Hulk wanted to go back and work with Vince Jr., wanted to be a part of this project, especially when he heard it. And of course, this led to then the transition of champion Bob Backlund to Iron Sheik, of course, which was then into Vince's storytelling of good versus bad guy. Doesn't really work well with the narrative now, but it of course was the Americans were the good guys, the international people were the heels. So for example, Iron Sheik, of course, being from Iraq, would work as the heel. Hell, me and you Silk would be heels back in the day, being from the UK, but that's how it worked. So that's how they did it, and that's how they put bums in seats back then. It would have worked now in 2024, and of course, like I say, time moves on, but Vince said, look, that's the time period for then, so he doesn't regret it because that's what worked for then. That's the life, how it worked then. So yeah, he moved on to the Iron Sheik, and that's when he could move the title over to Hulk Hogan to get the big pop, to get the big reaction, make the star that was Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, I mean, even Dave Meltzer says it at this point as well. Like, obviously, Big Dave, one of these people that obviously isn't employed by WWE, he says that managing to get Hogan, like, obviously with his popularity from being in Rocky 3, and you kind of like, he's a household name at this point. Like, I didn't realize Rocky 3 was before the WWF stuff, so I initially thought that Hogan got that based off of his WWE stuff, but the fact that it's the reverse, and Vince is then able to take Hogan, who has been seen by millions of people, because bearing in mind the Rocky series is a massive boxing series. It's the third film, and people have obviously, do you know what I mean? The first Rocky film in itself is like kind of like, it's either a hit or a miss. It's a hit. It gets another 2 films. They put Hulk Hogan in one of them, and Vince then decides to bring this guy back and decides to make him an absolute superstar. And Meltzer sums up and says that Hogan is the reason why Vince made it, because he was able to take this name and make him just I think it's either in this episode or the second one where he turns around, he goes and makes Hogan one of the most worldwide famous people. Like, everyone around the world knew who Hulk Hogan was in the 80s and 90s. You couldn't walk down the street and find someone who didn't know who this guy was.
No, absolutely not. And that will be touched on more in episode 2, obviously, after WrestleMania 3 with Andre the Giant. But obviously, that's the centerpiece then that's been gathered. He is the champion. They can start building the process to WrestleMania, which they want to build towards. But there are some complications that come before that. But first off, obviously, Vince McMahon Sr. does pass away. But what we do learn, obviously, is before that, he does actually turn around and say that he's proud of his son because of the fact he said, look, all these territories, they're not real friends and everything. He's almost... to use explanations, fuck him, basically, was pretty much what he said. And the day before he died, he told Vince he loved him, and we do actually see Vince look to get a bit emotional there. Obviously means a lot to him that he probably didn't hear it, and obviously he had to go through all his life obviously without it, and that does a lot to the mental psyche of someone, I suppose.
Yeah, man, and like I said, it almost humanizes Vince in that short moment where you can see him well up, because we go back to the start of it where he turns around and says that he was brought up with an abusive stepfather, and like he never felt the love from a father figure, and then to have his own dad. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still think it's pretty crap that he didn't hear his dad say he loved him until the day before he died. But I think that, do you know what I mean? The fact that he still, even though he only said it once, it probably still meant the world to him as a human being, which I think, like, it just means so much to a guy. And like I said, I think anyone knows that having a parent that means something to you, do you know what I mean? You're gonna well up like that. So, like I said, at this point, like, I'm appreciating the human side of Vince McMahon, because it's kind of like a lot of people just take him as this destructive, crazed, angry billionaire guy, and this just really brings him back down to earth at this point.
Yeah, it shows that there is with him, like you said, to hear that. I mean, a lot of people, we're thankful and lucky to get that and have good upbringings, and he's not had a good upbringing, clearly, from what's been shared here on this documentary. And obviously to get a moment like that where he does get that, like you're saying, there is a vulnerability, there is a moment where you can sympathize with him, and that whether you love him or hate him. So there is that moment there, and obviously it's good that he got that moment, is what I would say with that. But obviously leading up to them will be the biggest show for him, which will be WrestleMania. Obviously, there were some complications. I mean, John Stossel, hope I've said this correctly, is the first one, obviously. Meeting with Hulk Hogan, obviously wanted to get that Hogan better is what the gist was here, but it actually turned out that instead he was asking Hogan about if he'd been blading. He clearly was looking to expose the business again. 1984-85, a time where wrestling was protected. You know, everyone still had this sort of thing of like these carnies. Is it real? Is it not? How do they do it? You know what I mean? Like these are legitimate bad dudes that wrestle for real. It was not like how we know today of like, oh, it's sports entertainment. We know it's scripted and all the rest of it. So this guy was trying to expose that, and obviously was trying to get into the locker rooms. It was made clear to Vince. Apparently Vince, I think it was Tony Atlas maybe that may have said this part. I may be wrong, but it said, like, you know, not saying that he sent someone to do it, but David Schultz, of course, is someone who did actually clobber John, and this is seen on footage, and obviously it's a full Dark Side of the Ring episode based on that as well. Apparently Tony Atlas had said in there that there was actually celebrations in the locker room, but of course this does lead to a lawsuit, of course, which eventually does hit him. But he's actually, we do learn at the end of the episode that he's settled in 1987. There is a second one as well with the Richard Belzer show, I want to say, which actually was building up to WrestleMania. Hulk Hogan and Mr. T on it as well, and obviously again explaining pro wrestling and all the rest of it. And Belzer, I think, I don't want to say it was undermining it, but there were suggestions anyway. Oh, go and put a move on me, like, you know, go for it, like suggesting the idea of the fakeness sort of side of thing. Hogan put a move on him, which would have been a basic move for us to see, some sort of like a rare chin lock, if you will. So sort of like a chokehold, but that's what ended up kind of happening. And the dude, Richard, fell over and sort of was knocked out from it, which put a lot of danger and a lot of fear, obviously. And this is just before WrestleMania as well, made the show vulnerable, which obviously, if you don't live through it, which, you know, to be fair, I didn't live through that moment, and obviously even if I did, I wouldn't have been aware of what was going on. It's kind of like, wow, like, you know, to think like this big thing had been set up to here, the plug could have been pulled from it. But again, another lawsuit that did get settled in 1990 eventually. Yeah,
it's like, I mean, I think everyone kind of knows infamously about, especially the David Schultz, John Stossel one, because he apparently burst his eardrum and stuff like that. But obviously, this is all on the hype to WrestleMania 1. I mean, the thing I didn't know about this as well was the fact that Vince had started a talk show and was doing skits like it was some sort of, like, we see these today, like I don't really watch a lot of regular TV nowadays, but you obviously pick any skit show, Saturday Night Live, for example. Vince was trying to do his own stuff in promotion to this, and this all comes off the back of it. And I mean, I think the thing is that it's common practice with anything that tends to become big or famous or popular, is that there's always going to be someone out there that's going to want to almost humble you and knock you down a peg and put you in your place. And that's why you get these people like John Stossel and Richard Belzer that try to expose the business for what it is. But like you said, back in the 80s, it's kind of like wrestlers were going to shows and getting death threats and people putting knives on them and guns on them in the car park, and it was just a commonplace thing. And then to have someone almost try and lower the value of the work that the people have put in before them. So there's people that have done all this, they've been through these traumatic experiences, then to have someone who's trying to expose the business and take away the value of it to what it means to the guys that are actually performing, you can understand why they're going to be a little bit arsy about it and why they're going to want to defend it. But yeah, obviously in terms of promotion wise, especially with the Belzer one, because obviously it's on TV, he falls unconscious, he cracks his head open, there's blood pouring out of his head, he stands up, turns, and the back of his head is shown on camera pouring blood. So it's not a good look. And like even Hogan admits it wasn't his smartest idea ever. But it's just one of them things, isn't it, when someone tries to critique something that you're proud of or something that you do of your job. Like it's the same with, for instance, us, man. Like someone turned around and said that this podcast is crap. It's kind of like, well, we put effort into this. We enjoy doing this. Do you know what I mean? It's like you're entitled to your opinion, but what I don't understand why you've got to come and do it. Do you know what I mean? It's just one of them things.
Absolutely, and it's a good time. If you are enjoying it, do hit the like button on this video and subscribe if you're new here. No, I completely agree with all of that of what you've just said there, obviously, and it's a difficult balance, especially in that era, because you know, for them it was protect the business at all costs, but obviously when crossing that line, it can cause some problems and some tension, and it did cause a couple of lawsuits as well, and obviously it wasn't. Let's be fair, it doesn't look like it was Hogan's smartest move to do. He said it himself, so I think it's fair to say that it probably wasn't. But obviously, there is the idea then of you have your centerpiece for WrestleMania. But the other thing that is to make the show even more special is the idea of attraction and celebrity. And one celebrity, obviously, that was mentioned that helped the crossover for WWF at the time, obviously WWE to us today, to cross over to MTV to do a couple of shows, was Cyndi Lauper. Now, Cyndi Lauper, of course, had Captain Lou Albano in one of her videos, which led to do some work together where they could do a storyline of how Lou Albano could pretty much say that he was the one that got her over in this world, and the fact that she wouldn't be anything without him. Obviously derogatory towards women as well, which is not great to see in 2024, but I guess that's the time period of then. But it led to her getting involved in the wrestling business, and she was involved on a couple of shows, which is pretty cool to see. And of course, she was a celebrity that would be able to help the women's division as well, because women's wrestling was not a high priority in the 80s, but it led to have her in the corner of one Wendy Richter for WrestleMania 1.
Yeah, I mean, look, dude, I'm going to bang on it again. Great business decision by Vince to bring in someone like Cyndi Lauper. Like he states, their women division wasn't like the biggest thing in the world ever, and to bring in someone of like pop culture that is as big as Cyndi Lauper, to have her do WrestleMania, to have her like just do appearances on their television shows, to even have the opportunity to have WWE be broadcast on MTV, it's just smart business. And in terms of obviously like the derogatory stuff, I mean, even Vince says it in this episode that you kind of have to. It's like what we do whenever we review one of the retro pay-per-views. It's kind of like you have to take it with tongue in cheek that it's a different time. It's just how the product was portrayed at that time. And yeah, I mean, like, don't be wrong, I think at this point Vince is generally trying to make something out of women's wrestling and trying to make it a bigger deal than what it is, because you've still got the likes of Fabulous Moolah, Wendy Richter, all doing bits for women's wrestling, but he's trying to, by the looks of it as a business move, trying to make it a bigger deal.
And it certainly does, and certainly does succeed around that time period as well. There is quite a bit of it in the first couple of WrestleManias and bigger shows, which features some women's championship matches, like you mentioned, the likes of Wendy Richter. I think Alani Kai is another one that's involved there. You mentioned Fabulous Moolah, who does appear in a later episode on this documentary. And obviously with some other star power as well, the idea of Mr. T being in the main event of the first WrestleMania, teaming with Hulk Hogan against Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff, and also Muhammad Ali as a special guest referee as well. And obviously the one last thing I suppose of this WrestleMania was putting all the money involved. We're betting big on this one. I think all the finances were put on this one. If this show had gone bust, I think the company would have been finished, but it was a move that Vince felt he needed to make a play. It's almost like, dare we say, it's an all-in moment, and as it's described, WWF hit a home run on this one for WrestleMania 1. It ticked all the boxes in Madison Square Garden and created a whole new fan base.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, he doesn't, like, we'll talk about more than, like, well, we'll be touching it briefly, but the fact that WrestleMania 2 is kind of just skipped over in the next episode, it's kind of like he puts all his balls in one bag, tries to knock it out of the park. It works, but he's still got a long way to go in terms of learning how to make WrestleMania as big as possible.
Absolutely, it does take a couple of them to really sort of hit home, but I can say from experience, WrestleMania 2 is not quite an easy watch. But WrestleMania 1, obviously, yeah, the grand exposure of everything about it is certainly, it's special to watch as a wrestling fan, even if it's not the best wrestling quality. I would just say, which is not really featured in the documentary, so I won't touch on too much here. But I would recommend people to go and watch that show for historical purposes alone. It really does show you the blurs of what Vince McMahon's vision of wrestling actually is, which is more entertainment based, but actually having the flavor of wrestling in as well and getting everything over in form of story. But is there anything more you'd like to discuss before we wrap things up for episode 1?
No, dude. I mean, like, I would just highly recommend anyone to go and watch this series, because there's probably bits that we've even missed out, but there's still so much to see. I mean, that I was going to say at the top of the episode, I mean, they interviewed Brett briefly, and I'm like, Brett being Brett, still trying to blow smoke up his own backside. It's just like, it's what I expect from Bret Hart. So, like, dude, there's just, like I said, there's 6 episodes to delve into, man. So I just can't wait to talk about the next one, really.
Absolutely. Well, you've not got to wait long for the second one as well. We are planning to drop 2 of these on the same day today, and keep an eye on the channel because the series will be dropping throughout the week. But thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, share with a friend, and subscribe as well. And let us know your thoughts of episode 1 of the Vince McMahon, Mr. McMahon, I should say, documentary on Netflix in the comments below. But thank you all for watching, and yeah, it's tagged to the side of your screen right now. Go and give it a watch for episode 2. All the best.